Continuing with the Melachot. So this is for the Rosh Hashanah Simcha ben Bat Yeta and all Cholim of Klal Yisrael. And we're going to do a new one now, and it is called grinding. Grinding, I think we're familiar with this one. Grinding, prohibitions, there are 6 of them. Breaking up something into very small particles, milling grain to make flour, grinding coffee, using a pepper mill, using a grater, mincer, or chopper, removing dried mud, causing powder to be formed. Okay, so let's just, let me just explain. A pepper mills, like you get these pepper, you can't grind on Shabbos. Like, you get these pepper holders, and you actually have to physically grind it. You can't do that on Shabbos.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's actual motion. And when you walk in dry mud, let's say on Shabbos, if you walked in mud after rain, you can't fiddle, or you try not to take the mud off. Rather wait till after Shabbos or walk on grass maybe. So that's considered grinding. So one may not cut vegetables into very small pieces, but one may cut them into slightly larger pieces than normal if such food is for immediate consumption. If a young child has difficulty digesting slightly larger pieces, one may even cut and serve small pieces if it is immediately prior to eating. So what it says there, I'll continue tomorrow. You can't cut food that is not recognizable, like vegetables. If you cut it and you can't recognize it, then that's actually grinding. You're not allowed to do that. It has to still be like a piece of tomato. If you grind it, or a piece of lettuce that you can't even see what it is, then that's asur.
Okay.
One more thing.
Okay.
Food which doesn't grow from the ground, such as cooked meat, fish, eggs, may be mashed in or cut into small pieces, but a grater or mincer may not be used.
Okay, interesting.
It's okay. I'll finish it off tomorrow.
Yeah, let's generally aim for 2 halachas a day, which is what we've covered. Yeah. Excellent.
Within it, yeah. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Kev. Thanks, man. I learn something every time you teach us. Honestly.
I'm also learning. It's also good for me.
Good. So, guys, I tell you what. I couldn't get a hold of Rabbi Kabb. He left me messages. I left him. Friday's a very difficult day for him. It's a short day. Yes. He has to prepare for his family. He's really amazing in helping his wife prepare for Shabbos and help the kids ready. So it's difficult. So I had to read this again and again. And this is the understanding that I got, is that basically, when we look at the Torah can teach rules that are obvious. Why? Because the obvious doesn't mean that those rules don't apply. Okay? I'll give you an example of some obvious rules. Don't steal, don't murder. I know, so for some sociopathic or psychopathic people, it's not obvious. But let me just tell you why it is obvious. There's a Gemara that discusses when non-Jewish people are going to go to the next world and they're going to complain that they never received the 10 Commandments themselves, which, by the way, all the nations were offered. But they could say, listen, I was born into a generation where I never had access to it. What's going to be asked of them is as follows. Did you treat people the way you wanted to be treated? This is the understanding that I have, right? So it's going to say, yes, obviously. So why did you murder Jack? No, well, Jack took part of my business. Yes, but did you want to be murdered? No. Okay, so why did you murder Jack? Jack took part of my business. No, you're not hearing what we're saying. So the answer to that is as follows, is that things that you do not wish to happen to you, by logical inference, you cannot do to others. In a lawless society, we often discuss murder is a theft of life. So adultery is a theft of one's spouse. And then you have standard thievery. Anything that you don't want done to yourself is logical that you should not do it to others, because to create a society that's not anarchistic, meaning anarchy means there are no rules. And the law, Noahide law, is to set up courts of law between Jews and non-Jews, etc. All human beings have to set up courts of law, because we have to know that some people, unless they're going to get the full force of the law against them, are not going to behave. The big will take from the small. And in fact, that's how the mafia were developed, is that a lot of small people got together to tonk back the big. But it's all bullying. And unless you've got a law system to show consequence of action, then you've got a problem. One of the things about religion, which Marx turned around and said, it's the opiate of the masses, meaning that religion is what keeps people in line. I think it was Voltaire that turned around and said, religion is what stops the poor from killing the rich. It's true. It's true. So what we're saying here is that the Torah might teach things that are obvious, but it still has to be stated in law. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Even if the logic is obvious. Why? Because there are some logics that are the mishpatim, chukim, and mitzvot. So chukim are things that cannot be understood by logic, but they are Torah rules. But even that which can still has to be stated. In other words, Kev? I can't hear you.
I'm just changing my shirt. Sorry, I had to take my shirt off. That's why.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't for the video.
Yeah, well, we might have had more hits if you took your shirt off on YouTube. There's some ladies out there that would have held up 10 points. Scorecards. All right. So let's get back to the daf. So what I'm saying is as follows, is that the reality is Torah law, any law has to state the obvious because it has to be able to punish upon which is stated. So from what I can deduce, things that are in the Gemara and Mishnah are stating the non-obvious. Otherwise, why repeat the obvious? That's the understanding that I got this weekend from studying it. So therefore, this discussion with Rav Zavid and Rav Papa is the things that are used against them in an argument are things that Rav Zavid will say of Rav Papa, well, it states the obvious. It states in the Mishnah the obvious. Why would it need to state it? And then Rav Papa would say to Rav Vid, well, your argument is obvious, so why would that obviousness be in the Mishnah? Gav, are you with me? I feel like everybody's on a different mission tonight. Okay, so what I'm saying is, Gav, here we have it. The Mishnah, from what I understand, is bringing the non-obvious. So if the Torah is bringing what's stated in law, and the Mishnah just repeats the obvious of the law, why do you need the Mishnah? The Mishnah would obviously teach you something that you could not derive from logic, nor derive from straightforward scripture. That's what I seem to understand. So something that would seem to be in Rav Papa's favor is actually in Rav Zavid's favor, and vice versa. Why? Because if it was a proof for Rav Papa, but it was absolutely logical, why would Rav Papa need the proof if logic was there from the Mishnah? There has to be something deeper in it on either fact. So the fact that it's obvious is a proof against that person. And I'm going to show you how it plays out. This is my understanding. I might be wrong, but as far as I'm concerned, this is the only understanding we can come to. So the first thing is, let me just read the Mishnah to refresh it. Well, let me just explain the Mishnah. So what happens is this particular Mishnah, so it's teaching a law of an ox, okay? And it says there's a principle in order to teach that an ox becomes muad, okay? So it says what happens in a case where an ox gores certain species but not others, or gores on certain days but not others. Is it a case that if it gores one species but not others, it becomes, what do you call it, prohibited for all species, meaning that it has a muad status of full payment because it's considered forewarned? And if it gores on certain days but not others, do you have to pay muad payment on all the days? In other words, is the pattern of muad or forewarned, which has financial implication based on the specificity of what it does, on general principles of setting an established pattern? That's what we're going to determine. Okay? So it plays out like this. If an ox that is muad, all right, in fact, what I want to do is I want to actually share my screen. And then I'm going to explain it more than what's in my screen. Just give me a sec. Now Arthur's disappeared. Guys, it's so difficult. I find it so difficult. Because,
Yeah, relax. I was just
okay, but
checking
no,
the surface.
I know.
That's when you're supposed to leave your screen on.
Yeah, Arthur, we need points, man. You've lost weight. We might even, you're looking good these days. All right.
That's as far as I get.
Okay. All right, guys, let's get started. Come on. All right. So, can you read my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are three basic statements. I know I didn't put this as complicated as in the Mishnah, but I wanted to keep it simple. The first statement is an ox that is muad regarding animals of its own species, but it is not muad regarding animals not of its species. Second statement, very clean. An ox that is muad regarding people, but is not a muad regarding animals. Clean. Third statement, an ox that is muad regarding young animals, but is not a muad regarding mature animals. That's pretty clean. Now, guys, can you please put your phone on mute?
Or aircraft mode.
Something.
No, it doesn't work, man, on aircraft mode. I don't know why. I've got some beep. I don't know where it's coming from.
So, Damon, why didn't it use language not of other species? It doesn't just say only of its own species it is muad. Why does it have to go use extra words that are superfluous? It should have said only animals that are muad are only of its own species. That's it.
Okay, so I'm going to show this.
It's too, you know what I mean? The English.
Listen, Kevin, I actually agree with you. Is that this is the thing that also used to upset Michael? Okay, really upset Michael. Why did it say it in a more complicated manner? But the reason I wrote it in three separate statements is when you separate it with lines, etc., it makes more sense why it was more expansive.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the problem is that the Gemara seems to repeat itself quite a bit and have a lot of extra words, and it's not the Gemara. I think it's the Schottenstein, guys. Honestly, I think it's the Schottenstein.
Yeah, the Schottenstein. Yeah, their translation exactly.
Yeah,
it's terrible. Yeah.
But this is I can't find one extraneous word here, Arthur. I don't know about you. It's saying that an ox that is muad regarding young animals. It has to say another part of the statement, because what's the point? It has to say, but it's not a muad regarding mature animals. Nothing in the Mishnah is wasted. Nothing that I can see in these three statements is wasted. Can you, Kevin, in just the Mishnah?
None of the words. Are you saying there's no extra
words?
No,
I'm saying just look at the Mishnah of what I'm sharing on my screen. An ox that is muad regarding animals of its own species, but it is not a muad regarding animals not of its own species. I think that's a very clear statement. I don't think that's
it could have just said it's only muad regarding animals of its own species. That's it. You didn't have to write not of its own species. It's I had to read it twice when I went out because it's
that actually isn't true. But how do you do the second statement? Though you're absolutely right with the first statement, guys. Do you hear what Kevin's saying? It's absolutely correct in the first statement.
Letters, words, are superfluous words, which are not necessary.
In the first statement, not in the second.
Yeah, in the first, the other two are fine. The first one is not.
But Kevin is 100% right. But I think it just sets the tone. An ox that is muad regarding people. What does that mean? You have to say, but it's not muad regarding animals. That second statement isn't superfluous, but the first one it is. I think it just wants to repeat the same language. And then an ox that is muad regarding young animals, but is not muad regarding mature animals. But you could have said, Kevin, you're right, an ox that is only muad regarding young animals. But then, you know what the problem is by saying that an ox that is only muad regarding young animals? It would have implied that it was never tam with regard to young animals. That's the problem.
Always muad from the outset.
Yes, that's the problem with that statement. So it had to make a statement inferring if an animal is tam regarding young animals, it is not muad regarding adult animals. That's why I couldn't use the word only, because it implies that only in that category is it muad automatically without a tam principle. All right, so guys, I'm going to share, I'm just going to explain the mission. Now that we've done those three statements, there was a question regarding, it says, an ox that is muad regarding animals of its own species, for example, oxen, is not muad regarding animals not of its own species. or an ox that is muad regarding people but is not muad regarding animals, or one that is muad regarding young animals like calves, is not muad regarding mature animals. This is the law. For goring those creatures regarding which it is muad, the owner pays full damages. But for goring those creatures regarding which it is not muad, the owner pays only half damages. So the question is, why state this? We know the laws for muad and tam. It keeps repeating itself. It's not necessary. It's going to bring it up in the Gemara. A question related to the case, the disciples said before Rabbi Yehuda, if it is muad regarding the Sabbath, but it's not muad regarding the weekdays, what is the law? Rabbi Yehuda said to them, for goring on the Sabbath, the owner pays full damages. For goring on weekdays, he pays half damages. Rabbi Yehuda adds, and when this animal is a tam, and when is this animal a tam? When, in other words, what it's saying is, when does it revert back to being a tam in terms of status? When it desists from goring on 3 Shabbat days. All right. Now I'm going to go straight in to share my screen on something. And guys, we're going to fly through the Gemara. Give me 1 second. I made something fixed up on the image that I did tonight. All right, look at this. All right. So, Rav Savid, his default position is that if it's muad in one case, it's muad in all cases, whether it regards species or situations, unless there's known evidence to the contrary. That's all. Rav Papa is very straightforward. If an ox is muad for one species, it's not automatically assumed to be muad for other species, and the same in terms of situations. A muad in one particular case is not necessarily automatic muad across the spectrum. So Rav Papa rules that this is halacha. Okay, that's the major difference. This is what I've deduced. And Rav Zavid is talking about behavioral observation. What do we mean? Is that the only reason that it's not muad for all cases is that you can observe that there's 3 times that the animal desisted in a certain case. So, for example, if you see that an ox is exposed to sheep and they're witnesses, and 3 times it's exposed to sheep and it doesn't gore, that becomes a behavioral observation. So in that case, it's safe. But because Rav Zavid doesn't want to take chances, he's saying when we notice a muad, in other words, a habitual pattern in one case, we have to assume it's that way in all situations. And I used an example, lahavdil, of a pedophile, is that if somebody is locked in prison because in the middle of Alabama, they're fiddled with children, the minute they end up going to New York on parole, you're not exactly going to trust them around looking after your kids in daycare. Even though the case was in Alabama, and even though he had a tendency and track record to like young blonde boys, and you've got a brunette son, I think you'd give it a miss. Am I wrong, guys?
100%.
Yes. So you're not going to take a chance. That's what Rav Zavid is saying. Not in this case. I'm just using the analogy of a pedophile. So I understand where he's coming from. He said, if you've seen a reformation, or in a certain case the animal doesn't react, then it can be deduced. But there has to be known behavioral evidence. That's the major difference between Rav Papa, who deems it's halacha. Do you see how I've changed the chart? So now I'm going to talk around the Gemara.
That's actually very clever, by the way. Eh? Very clever that the one's observational, the one's unlocked. Well done for that.
Okay, thanks, man. I appreciate it. So, so I'm just going to skip that first part of the Gemara according to Schottenstein because it just adds to confusion. And I'm just going to 37a3. Okay, and I'm going to say, well, where do they draw support from? So Ravid draws support from an inference from the Mishnah's latter segment. So let me just share the latter segment with you again. That's why I drew the wording in my own words. Sorry, guys, about this. But I have to explain it for somebody like me. It's very simple. All right. So Arth, read the latter statement, which is the last statement.
The last one?
You got the wrong screen on.
No, I haven't.
You got, okay, the bottom one? The one of the young animals?
Yes.
Yes, okay. It's not muad regarding mature
What
animals.
is not muad? Art, you need to read the words properly, please.
But it is not a muad regarding mature animals.
No, hang on. Something's wrong. Is it my screen that's wrong? Maybe it's my
I'm
screen.
seeing.
Arthur,
I
I owe you an
don't think
apology. Hang on. What screen are you reading?
The three things you had there that you're reading about the difference.
All right. Let me just share the screen again and let's see we're on the same page.
Probably not.
We
I
might.
appreciate it. Must be my reading skills.
Okay, read
Okay,
it.
this is fine.
Okay, at the bottom.
Yeah,
it
but
is
Arthur,
not-
you said is not muad. I want you to
not
read a
a
proper
muad.
sentence. An ox that is muad regarding young animals, but is not muad regarding mature animals.
Not a muad. So they're not a muad regarding a mature animal.
Arthur, you
Is
read
that-
it's not a muad regarding. Just read it, the full sentence, please, Arthur.
Okay. An ox that is a muad regarding young animals, but is not a muad regarding mature animals.
Correct. So that, if I share my screen, just give me 1 second, guys. If I share the screen, that's exactly what it says in the Mishnah. It's not a muad. So whether you use the term, but it is not a muad regarding these animals. Whether you use the term is not muad or not a muad, it doesn't make a difference. It's still discussing the same thing. I wrote it word for word, guys, word for word. The only thing I did is I took breaks with these sentences because it's too cluttered. That's what I did, Art.
Okay.
All right, mate. Just read it again.
So you put it up.
I know. Sorry, mate.
Okay. An ox that is a muad regarding young animals, but is not a muad regarding mature animals.
Right. Now, whose opinion? Who's using this as a proof? Is who?
Rav Papa.
No. You see,
Rav
this is
Zvi.
where no, but Arthur's right. Let me explain to you why Arthur thinks this, and he's completely correct. It sounds like a proof for Rav Papa. This is the argument we had the other day, and Arthur's completely correct. Is that it sounds like a proof for Rav Papa, because what did Rav Papa say? Rav Papa said again, if it's muad in one case, it's not necessarily muad in another case. So it seems to sound like Rav Papa. An ox that is muad regarding young animals is not a muad regarding mature animals. So it sounds like Rav Papa. Arthur's right, but it's actually a proof for Rav Zavid. And this.
Okay, I'll tell you how I knew. Can I just help everybody here a little bit? It's the observation I made today.
Yes.
So, Damon, you probably know, I mean, you know this already, I'm sure, but I don't give highlighted it, is that with Rav Zavid, his sentences always put the word but is not a muad, whereby with Rav Papa, there's no but. It just says is not muad.
I understand.
So that's how you know.
No,
So that's quite a distinction. I know you understand it. I'm just saying, I don't think the other guys, because I picked up straight away that it was Rav Zavid just from the language.
Yeah,
It
but
says,
there's a
not
problem, Gavin. There's one problem with what you're saying. Gavin picked up the complete correct observation. I just need to apply it in a different way because there's a problem with the way you've said it. Let me just tell you, Gav, but you're spot on with the observation. If you look at every sentence in this Mishnah, it all is, but it is not a muad. Okay? Let me just show you what I'm saying here. Let me share the original, and then you guys tell me what you think. Okay? Gav, you are correct in terms of what you noticed, but the application is different. I'm just going to share it. Sorry, Gav, give me 1 sec.
No problem.
Yeah, look here. This is the Mishnah. I'm sharing my screen. This is on my page of my Gemara. Every sentence here says an ox that is muad regarding people, but is not a muad regarding animals. An ox regarding animals of its own species, but is not a muad regarding animals not of its own species. So because it used this in every sentence of the Mishnah, okay, it's not proving Rav Zavid's case. Because if it showed one saying the word but the rest not, you could say it's a sentence exclusively that Rav Zavid wants to hone in on. Does that make sense?
So if you have a look at that paragraph, you remember last time you showed us Rabbi Zavid and Rabbi Papa right next to each other. It's that one part.
I agree with you that the word but and is different. So what Gavin is saying is as follows, and I'm going to share my screen. Is Gavin?
That one part there. Yeah.
Have you seen my screen change?
Yeah, your screen change. I just can't see where you.
Yeah. Is not a muad, but is not a muad. It's here in the Gemara. Can you see?
Yeah. So but is not a muad, and Papa is. I'm just saying that's where I got it from this.
No. But you're correct. What I'm saying is, it even though they say that, and he uses that word as a distinction in the actual Mishnah, and I've studied this. It uses but is not a muad in every case. It's just where the emphasis is where they put the comma. Let me give you an example. 3 kids are caught swimming. 3 kids are caught swimming in Umschlanga at private pools at the cabanas. Okay? So they grab one of the kids, and the security guys saying to them, I'll tell your parents, you're not paying fees here. You're not allowed to swim. These are for residents only. He said, no, I read the sign. It says, no, comma, swimming allowed. He put a comma after the word no. Do you understand?
Yes, 100%.
So what we're saying here is it's where they put the comma. Because if you read the sentence, an ox that is moored regarding animals of its own species, but it is not a muad regarding animals not of its own species. If you put the comma in a different space and you're reading is not a muad regarding animals not of its own species, your inference is opposite.
Yes, absolutely.
So you are completely correct in noticing that word. But the word but is not evidence just to that sentence. It matters grammatically where you put the comma. Gavin is 100% correct. So let me just explain what we actually mean here. Now I'm just going to share my screen. And then it'll make a lot of sense. Well observed, yeah? Okay. So,
Damon?
Yeah?
Seems like they're saying the same thing.
It does seem like they are, but what I'm saying is it's not. But what I'm saying is it's not, because let me just explain to you why this is a proof for Rav Zavid. Arthur was right in saying it seems like a proof for Rav Papa, because it's showing a distinction when you just read the Gemara. If you read all of these lines of the Mishnah, who does it sound like? Rav Papa or Rav Zavid?
Sounds like Rav Papa, because
Absolutely.
I know
Absolutely. No, Arthur, you're 100% correct. Guys, before I explain this whole Gemara, I want you to read it and you can see it all sounds like Rav Papa. Because if you say an ox is muad regarding animals of its own species, but it's not a muad regarding animals not of its species, that's Rav Papa, classic Rav Papa. They're saying, listen, this is halacha. He's saying it's halacha. So he's reading it exactly, literally as it is. Okay? All of these sentences, but Rav Zavid is reading it as something different. He's saying an ox is muad regarding animals of its own species, but if it's known, and that's what the Gemara has to add, there's a word saying, but if it is known that it's not a muad regarding animals not of its own species, it's not muad. So in other words, his major emphasis is not on the word but, even though the Gemara is bringing that word, Gavin. Think of that word rather as if it is known. Are you with me?
I did read it like that. That's why I picked up that difference as well when I was reading, because I read through this as well. It's but not is a muad. If it's known not to be a muad, that's basically how I read it. Even though it's not there. And it makes more sense to be there. But I did see the distinction in the reading, the way he words it, as opposed to the way Rav Papa words it, that he's saying exactly what you just said now.
Yeah,
correct.
The big difference between Rav Papa and Rav Zaib is Rav Zaib is more like guilty until proven innocent.
Exactly.
And Papa is innocent
until proven guilty.
Yeah.
Yes. Because Rav Papa
Also
said,
good
why do you want to make the owner of the ox pay full payment damages if there's nothing wrong? And Rav Zavid said, listen, you want this ox around your children. So it's exactly as Arthur summarized. But I'm going to just tell you now why that last statement is a proof for Rav Zavid and not Rav Papa, because it sounds like a proof for Rav Papa. Okay? So the latter statement is Rav Zavid's a proof. It says an oxen is muad regarding young animals, but it is not a muad regarding mature animals. So I'm going to tell you in a nutshell what it means before we read it. So what it's actually saying in the Gemara is Rav Zavid is saying to Rav Papa, logic tells you that. That's logic. And when it comes to logic, I've got no problem with that. But then why would the Mishnah state the obvious? That's my proof against you, Rav Papa. That's what Rav Zavid is saying. He's saying because it's obvious that young animals would not attack full. It's obvious that if an ox picks on animals that are small and puny, that it would be reticent to attack animals that are bigger than it or the same size as it. It's logic. So the fact that it's logical, you don't need it in the Mishnah. So the very fact that it's in the Mishnah is proving that when you have a circumstance where it's observed that it's observed, that's when it has to be stated. But this is not a proof. The Mishnah is saying that it has to be a known fact that it has refrained from attacking mature animals, because, in other words, it's logic. Why would the Mishnah have something of logic in it? That's what it's saying, Kevin. That's a proof Rav Zavid said for him. Are you with me? It's not halacha. Why would you have halacha based on logic in the Mishnah? Now, this is the part that has fumbled me up on Thursday night, because on the Torah you have halacha that's based on what? On both logic and scriptural sourcing. Am I right?
Yeah.
But what he's saying is, if it appears in the Mishnah, it's counterintuitive to what's obvious. Otherwise, why would you need it in the Mishnah? That's what he's implying. And I'm going to read it out. Okay. Just hang on a second. We've got a few minutes. So it's saying, the Gemara explains, Rav Zavid draws an inference from the Mishnah's later segment. For the Mishnah taught, or one that is muad regarding young animals, but is not a muad regarding mature animals. Okay? All is well if you say that the Mishnah teaches, but it's not a muad, which implies that the ox whose tendencies are not known is assumed to be muad regarding mature animals. Okay? So what it's saying is as follows, is that the implication emerges in the following manner. By saying that the owner pays half damages for the goring of mature animals, when his ox is known not to be a muad regarding them, the Mishnah implies that it's because of this knowledge that it's not a muad. That's what Rashi said. Without definite knowledge, we would assume that just as an ox is muad regarding young animals, so too it's a muad regarding mature animals. But this is the contradiction. This is what I don't understand. So that's on note 18. But note 19 says something different, Gavin, and I'm going to read it and then I'm going to fix it up to our understanding. Okay? So it's saying, for the Mishnah is then informing us of the following, that even with regard to extrapolating from young animals to mature animals, an ox whose tendencies are not known is assumed to be a muad regarding mature animals. Thus, the Mishnah's ruling represents a novelty. So what does it mean, a novelty? Is that you might have thought that the ox's tendency to gore small calves doesn't render it muad regarding large mature oxen, whose size will deter it from attacking. So it's therefore necessary for the Mishnah to teach that size is not a consideration. And an ox that is muad regarding calves is also muad regarding mature oxen. So through the inherent meaning of implicit meaning of the phrase. So what Rav Zavid is actually saying is that the very fact that the Mishnah thought to mention it means that you've got to assume that it is muad only if you have evidence. Only if you have evidence to the contrary. You can't use logic here. And that's why the Mishnah mentioned it.
That's a good point, sir. Well done.
Okay. So now the question is on Rav Papa, and it's going to say to Rav Papa, well, how do you answer this? How do you answer this sort of attack? I'm going to send a new link, guys. Kevin, what I'm saying is as follows, is that what Rav Zved is saying is that Rav Papa needs to explain himself. Why? Because if it's stating the obvious, then you don't need the Mishnah to tell you that, look, logic will tell you, if it's a bully for small things, it might have second thoughts, and it might not necessarily attack things that are bigger than it or the same size as it. That's logic. So the fact that the Mishnah is saying specifically that it's not muad for bigger species, why state the obvious? So the Mishnah, Rav Zaved reads the Mishnah as follows, is that he's reading this as behavioral observation. So he's saying when you have witnesses that observe it's not attacking mature animals and it's only attacking young animals, and you have a case again where just out of the blue, like it's desisted from attacking adult oxen, but out of the blue it just attacks an adult ox, but it's got a history of attacking young small oxen. The owner then doesn't have to pay full payment damages because it's been observed to the contrary. So he's saying these rules in the Mishnah about behavioral observations with witnesses. Okay? It's a court case. And he's saying Rav Papa is just assuming it's a natural default position for halacha. So he's saying if it's a default position for halacha, why mention it in the Mishnah? Because this is obvious. It's logic. So if it's so logical and it happens every time, that the minute it attacks small, listen to this, the minute it attacks small animals, it will never attack things that are bigger in it. If that is so logical in the default position, and it always happens, why would you have to mention it in the Mishnah? It's obvious. There would never be an exception. So Rav Papa now has to give an explanation. Does that make sense, Gavin? Why it's an attack on Rav Papa? He's saying, if there's never an exception and you're so right, why do you even need it written? Something wrong that it has to mention that it's a known fact that you need witnesses for this court case. So Rav Papa now has to explain himself. So this is how Rav Papa explains it. Okay? So Rav Papa will tell you, for you might think to say that once the ox has broken through its inhibitions regarding this particular species by goring a young animal, it's broken through its inhibitions regarding any animal from the species. Okay? No matter whether the species is a mature member, whether it's a young member, either way the ox is considered a muad. So the Mishnah therefore informs us that despite having called young animals of this species, it's not assumed to be muad regarding the species mature members. Okay. So what the Gemara is basically saying is as follows, is that Rav Papa is saying, Rav Zaved, you telling me what I'm thinking. You don't know my thought process. And my thought process is logic will be different. The minute an animal attacks young creatures, it could maybe attack bigger creatures as it grows bigger. Let's take an example like that. It's small. It's not, as I think Gavin or Arthur or Kevin said the other day, a calf's not going to attack a big animal. So when a calf is small, it will only attack calves. Maybe you're saying that as a calf gets bigger, it's getting used to attacking and now sees other animals that are bigger. It's not so formidable because it's growing bigger. I'm just using that as an example. It's not Rav Papa's example. So as it's growing bigger, it gets more guts and it attacks bigger things. So who's to say that that would be necessarily the logical default position? He's saying the very fact of it is this Mishnah is halacha, and therefore it's stating that you cannot assume that if it attacks young animals, it's going to attack older animals. Because let's use that example of the calf. When a calf is young, it attacks younger animals, and it might grow out of it. So when it gets older, it might not be in the attacking, or it's fully grown, but it's not scared. It's not scared to attack baby animals because it's got no balls, it's got no guts. And then all of a sudden, when it sees animals of its own size, it figures, no, I might want to live another day. So he's saying you can't make any conclusions. So the Mishnah has to state the halacha, which is in a case where it attacks young, it's not automatically assumed for attacking mature, fully grown animals. That's Rav Papa's argument. Let's go on. Okay, so he has deflected Rav Zaved's attack on him. Now, the Gemara is saying, let's turn to Rav Papa's source for the reading. And Rav Papa draws a source from from the earlier segment. Let me tell you what that earlier segment is. I'm going to share my screen, guys. Rav Papa says, an ox that is muad regarding people is not muad regarding animals. Okay, so what is the first basis of this statement used for? So, Kevin, let me tell you, both Rav Zaved and Rav Papa use that statement, that first part as their basis of the statement. So this statement of an ox that is muad regarding animals of its own species is not a muad regarding animals not of its own species. That's something that isn't a bone of contention between both of them. It's not really such an issue between them because it's not a point of evidence. Rav Zaved uses this young and mature animals as evidence against Rav Papa, and Rav Papa uses this people versus animals in his attack against Rav Zaved, because he's saying an ox that is muad regarding people is not a muad regarding animals. So he's saying to Rav Zaved, fine, you attacked me by saying that logic is obvious. Okay, you saying that why would the Mishnah mention things that are obvious? So I can say to you, Rav Zaved, that your proof, my proof against you is this logical thing in the Mishnah, because you're saying that an ox regarding people is not muad regarding animals. But that's obvious. That's obvious. So why would the Mishnah mention it if it's obvious? Because Rav Papa is saying again, is that, listen, it's muad regarding people. Why is it muad regarding people and not animals? According to Rav Papa, because he's noticed, he's saying it's not necessarily muad regarding animals. In other words, that's the halacha. But he's saying to Rav Zaved, how do you deal with the logic where you say if it's muad for people, it's muad for animals? That is logic. But the Mishnah is specifically mentioning it because that logic doesn't always occur. So what's the logic of it, guys? We've been through this. Guys, tell it to me.
Logic of that sentence.
I'm saying if you take it on a logical basis, we went through this the other day, an ox that is muad regarding people, but is not a muad regarding animals. According to Rav Papa, he's attacking Rav Zaved, because Rav Zaved is saying that it's not only muad regarding people, but muad regarding animals. So he was saying, yes, logic will dictate that Rav Zaved is right. And the very fact that it mentioned in the Mishnah means the halacha is contradictory to logic because that logic is flawed. So the logic goes as follows, Gavin, is that...
Are you talking about the... Okay, go.
So that the logic goes as follows, is that people have got intelligence, and therefore people had mentioned in 2b, in Bava Kamma in 2b, that people have got the intellectual capacity to be aware and avert danger more than animals, okay? More than oxen. So bovines don't always avoid bovines. A case in point is that animals often dispute with each other with regards to territory. You know where you see two oxen kicking the ground about to go at each other? Let's use that as an example. Now, is it not logical that one of the oxen are going to end up dead or seriously injured? Yes or no?
Sure.
When they're fighting. So is it logical that they fight each other? No, it's instinct. Why is it not logical? Because the animal's going to get hurt as a result of butting heads with another ox in a charging scenario. It's instinct for territory. So a person that sees something with two horns, what do you call it? Striking the ground. What do you know when it puts its foot back, what do you call that off? Prepping for goring or prepping for an attack. In that particular case, when a human being says that, what should he do?
Run.
Run.
like hell.
Run like hell. Yes, so that's what a person does. A person doesn't say, well, I own this farm, and the next door neighbor's ox has no business being here. I'm going to teach the ox a lesson. He's going to say, no, let me get out of here because the ox has got no brains and I don't have any horns, and I'm going to come off second best. So he discerns that when the ox is about to charge, to get the hell out of there. Fine. But another animal doesn't discern that, even though it could wind up dead or injured. So an animal doesn't have any brains in comparison to a human. So so that's number one. And number two, it's known as mazal. So Rashi brings that a human being has got specific divine providence. What do we mean by divine providence, Kevin? Is that if a person is meant to do things in the world, Hashem created the earth as a testing realm for human beings, not for animals to eat grass. The fact that the animals there are to aid humans in food consumption and working animals, etc. But the whole stage unfolded as earth as a creation, as a ground to test man. And therefore man has divine providence that if God doesn't want this person to die, they will not die. I mean, obviously stupidity prevails, that if a tzaddik jumps off a building and a Rosha jumps off the building, they'll both go splat. But I'm saying short of that, there is divine protection where Hashem also gives somebody the intelligence to perceive danger. And if they can't perceive danger because they're distracted, Hashem might protect them for the ox not creating a fatal injury, but maybe just a temporary incapacitation injury. Does that make sense? So there's divine providence to protect that person, whether Betsy dies or Betsy's daughter, the cow, dies. It makes no difference in the divine scheme of things. It's a food source. That's all it is. That's all an animal is. It's a workhorse and a food source. It doesn't allow us to treat an animal badly, but an animal's destiny is not going to exactly unfold to give man some sort of devastating redemption, unless it's the paraduma. Does that make sense? So what Rav Zvi'id is saying is that if it's dangerous for people, it is definitely dangerous regarding animals, because if human beings are more protected by divine protection and intelligence, and this ox has managed to gore people 3 times and is a danger to people, surely it is a danger to a brainless, non-divinely protected animal. That's Rav Zvi'id's logic. And that logic is sound. Do you agree? Yes or no? It's sound.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
His logic.
Fine. So Rav Papa is saying, I also agree. I agree with you. That logic is correct. He's not disagreeing with Rav Zvi'id. He's saying, but the halacha doesn't go like that because it's not always the case, even though logic would tell you that from a kol v'chomer. Kol v'chomer is just what I explained now, is that it doesn't play out like that in reality, which is why the Mishnah is bringing this case, because the Mishnah doesn't tell you what's logical. It tells you what in fact is truly the case, despite a flaw in a natural assumption. Because what is a kol v'chomer, guys? It's an assumption. The assumption is as follows. If an ox has been very successful in injuring people that are far more intelligent than animals and have got divine protection and have been successful 3 times, it's definitely going to be more successful, at least as successful, attacking a dumb animal without divine protection. That is a kol v'chomer, meaning a logical inference deducted from reasoning. So Rav's Papa and Rav Zvi'id, Rav Papa is saying Rav Zvi'id is right, that is logic, but that's in reality not how the halacha plays out, because there's a flaw in that logic. And that flaw in that logic is my evidence against Rav Zvi'id. So I'm going to tell you what that is. Has this helped you guys, by the way, this explanation that I'm giving you now?
Yeah, very good.
Fine. So Rav, all is well if you say that the Mishnah teaches it's not muad, which implies that an ox whose tendencies regarding animals are not known is assumed not to be muad regarding animals. For the Mishnah is then informing us of the following, that even from people to animals, an ox whose tendencies regarding animals are not known is assumed not to be a muad to them. So it uses the term not known, which means logic would tell you that it's going to be as dangerous for animals as it is for people because of the logic we explained. So it uses the term, the Mishnah, it highlights, not the Mishnah, the Gemara, the word not known. Because Rav Zavid's big thing is you need to know these things to make a, it's a behavioral observation. And what Rav Papa is saying is that even if it's not known, this logic dictates. You don't have to know and see it to know logic. So he's saying the very fact that the Mishnah's ruling is a novelty proves that that it's not going to be a muad regarding animals. Okay, so it's saying, what's the novelty? I'm going to explain it now. Give me a second, guys. So the novelty is that your logic would dictate that it would automatically be as dangerous, if not more so, for animals. So that Rav Papa is saying this is exactly why the halacha has to teach differently. Because if you base it on logic, you would say that it's always muad regarding animals if it's muad for people. So Rav Papa is saying the very fact that the Mishnah stating the contrary means that the halacha is not according to logic because there's a flaw in the logic. So he's saying to Rav Zavid, explain yourself now, because you used this argument against me. So the Gemara is basically saying, which implies that the ox's tendencies regarding animals are not known, is assumed to be muad for them. One can now argue as follows. If from animals of one species to animals of another species, an ox whose tendencies are not known is assumed to be muad regarding animals of all species. This is according to Rav Zavid. In other words, the default position, if it's not known and it attacks one species, it's going to attack another. Then from people to animals, is it even necessary to say that an ox is assumed to be muad regarding animals? It's obvious that a muad regarding people is a muad also regarding animals. It's obvious. So, according to Rav Zavid's reading then, this ruling is superfluous. Per force, the correct reading follows Rav Papa that it's not a muad. So the exact explanation of this is that, just hang on a sec. There's basically no need for the Mishnah to say it explicitly. It's obvious. So the fact that the Mishnah is saying it explicitly, to the contrary, that if it's a muad for people, it's not necessarily muad for animals, is a proof against Rav Zavid. It's actually stating it outright. How does Rav Zavid defend himself? So Rav Zavid will tell you the Mishnah's earlier segment, in other words, the line that I've just read to you, an ox that is muad regarding people but is not muad regarding animals, speaks of an ox's reversion to a tam status. In other words, where the ox was at first both muad regarding people and muad regarding animals, and then it can be observed with witnesses, etc., from desisting from goring animals, then it's known that it's desisted from goring animals because that's been witnessed. And if it's seen on 3 occasions that it stood near an animal and didn't gore, it reverts back to tam status. And then if it gores again, it only pays half damages. However, the ox's reversion regarding animals does not affect its standing regarding people, where it remains in a muad, because if it gores a person, the owner pays full damages. So what Zavid is saying is, listen, I agree with you that it is logical. So why would the Mishnah have to mention it? But what I'm saying to you, Rav Papa, is that I'm not saying that at all. I'm talking about how does it revert back to a status of being tam after it's muad. And that's what I'm talking about. Again, I'm big on witnesses, Rabbi Papa. And what I'm saying is that if there are witnesses that come in a court case, say, the guy's saying that your ox gored my ox and it's muad and it owes damages, and the owner of the ox can bring 3 sets of witnesses to say that it's seen that the ox being around other oxen has actually desisted from attacking other oxen, and this is the fourth particular case, and only on this 4th case it's seen as attacking this other ox. It then only has to pay half payment damages. It says, Rav Papa, I'm saying when it reverts back to Tam, there has to be witnesses. And then I would say that it has reversed and it's done to Shuvah. It went to obedience school and it's come right. And it's not muad regarding other animals, but there has to be witnesses 3 times to say it had a situation where it was exposed to animals and it desisted, and the obedience school has worked. And in that case, it doesn't have to pay full payment damages to animals, but people it does have to, because it hasn't been witnessed 3 times as desisting from attacking people. So the Mishnah informs us that the ox's reversion with regards to animals is indeed a true reversion. So even Rav Zavid says it needs this particular wording in the Mishnah to talk about an ox making teshuvah and obedience school working. But he's saying, listen, the default position, I stand by it, that you have to be careful, that if it's attacked a person 3 times and been successful, the position is it is muad for attacking other animals unless there's evidence and it's been witnessed to the contrary. If there's evidence to the contrary, I'm saying I'll agree with you, Rav Papa. So that's fine. I think we can end off on this note because there's much more to deal with. But I hope I've helped you guys and made it clear. I've stuck exactly to an hour from where we started.
No, listen, well done. I've just got a quick observation I want to make,
yes,
which I think is quite a valid one. I think so. So what I observed, what I found strange about this whole Tam thing is, I understand that if an animal does 3 occurrences, it becomes muad, no problem. But to revert back to Tam status for not having done something 3 times in a row, I wouldn't trust that animal for 2-3 years. So that part, it doesn't fathom well with me. It doesn't sit well with me at all.
Okay, but we've discussed this in a previous daf. I think Gavin's bringing a good point. There's 2 arguments here. Do you remember there was an argument with? In fact, I'll bring that other Gemara where I was in the Mamzim Toti, where it says if an ox restrained on 3 consecutive days, and the other one said on 3 times it desists, etc., and it's noting observing behavior. And do you remember it talked about Kevin? Do you remember that case where it talked about what do you call it when there's seminal emission or a woman has fluids that they've picked up some sort of a venereal disease?
Zav.
Zav. It discussed the difference between a male Zav and a female Zav and menstrual periods, about how to count them in the calculation, etc. Okay? After we finish this Mishnah, I actually would like, before we go to the next Mishnah in 37, I'd like to do a review on that for about 5 minutes, if that's okay with you guys. Because I think, Gavin, it's a great point you're bringing up. I'd like to go through it in review about how it brings the example of the male Zav from desisting and a female Zav.